It's Tuesday, December 31st. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. It's basically almost a new year. Maybe by the time you're listening to this, it is a new year. Happy New Year's to all of you out there listening. And even though it is a new year, it is, as always, a hell of a day to talk ball. And join me to do just that is Dalton Del Don. Dalton, what's going on, buddy?
What's up, Harmon? You'll be happy, pumped, no doubt, to know that Yahoo Fantasy Forecast took down the inaugural Battle of the Yahoo Pods. We beat Inside Coverage's Charles Robinson, Frank Schwab in the title, barring a miracle Monday night. So, yeah, we took it down, the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast.
As we should. Listen, we cannot be sitting here losing title games to Charles Robinson, Frank Schwab. I mean, come on, who are these guys even?
No doubt. Yeah, we took care of business. Big games from Jaden Daniels, Brian Thomas Jr., Trey McBride finally reaching the end zone. So, yeah, how were your finals, Harmon? In all seriousness, how did you take home any big money ones?
I will not know until the game Monday night. So by the time people are listening to this, they'll know my fate based on Jahmyr Gibbs' performance. Let's just put it that way. That is what everything rides on for me is Jahmyr Gibbs. Would have loved a little more Jaden Reed yesterday. That would have been nice. Didn't quite happen. Drake London touchdown would have been nice, but still, basically everything rides on a little tiny bit of George Kittle, but mostly everything relies on Jahmyr Gibbs. So at this point, I can't tell you, but I have a pretty good feeling going into Monday night.
Fair enough, and same here. I have a few players involved in that game that sadly I sold the tickets to as a Niners fan. Was looking forward to that game, had it penciled before the season, Monday night against the Lions, but inconsequential for actually for both teams now. I think the Lions game, it only matters against the Vikings, so there's even some concern about people resting more.
Yeah, listen, we're not obviously talking about that game because it hasn't happened yet, but super interested to watch it and see how the Lions approach it. And I don't think you can feel too bad about selling those tickets, man. I'm not sure that you I'm not really sure that you're missing out on anything at this point.
Not the Niners.
Enough already for the 49ers, but it's enough already for fantasy football season because for most of you, it's over. Week 17 is the final week of fantasy regular season or fantasy playoffs, the championships. That's why we're talking about it here. Hopefully, if you listen to the show, it was a good year for you. If it wasn't, stuff happens. But for the most part, listen, only one team can win it every single year. A lot of listeners I know got into the playoffs, and that's what we feel good about. Making it into the playoffs, that's a little bit of skill. Winning it all, that takes a little bit of luck. But with that said, we're going to take today's podcast to put a bow on the fantasy season, and we're going to share 10 of the biggest lessons that we learned from the 2024 season that we will carry into 2025. It's 5 from each of us. It's a secret list. I have no idea what Dalton's going to bring to the table. I suppose there's a chance that we end up overlapping on a few of these or at least get into the same zip code as each other. But Dalton, why don't you give me your first lesson that you learned from this year?
Before I get to my lesson, I just want to say my main takeaway here is that football remains super hard to predict, Harmon. I mean, you compare it to baseball, which I'm going to jump into here. It's a series of one-on-one matchups. So much easier in comparison, man. Football remains highly unpredictable. Drew Lock just had the best EPA per play game since 2018, the 6th best since they invented the stat. I mean, it's in the fantasy championship. I actually had my best buddy who asked me, do I start Aaron Jones or Drew Lock in the Superflex? And I'm like,
wow.
I mean, yeah, he was that loaded at running back. He had 4 options, top 12. And I'm like, I guess he had Lock in. So I definitely never want to tell someone to change what they already have. I'm like, it's a safer play, but man, Jones, like a top 12 back, and Lock breaks the slate. Just craziness. But we get to the lessons learned. Speaking of quarterbacks, it's weight on quarterback. I'll start with a simple one, Harmon. It's the deepest the position has ever been. Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, no doubt standouts, worth their ADP, clearly. But the fantasy QB 4, 5, 7, 8, 9 were all free at draft tables. We're talking Jaden Daniels was not quite as free, but Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Bo Nix, Jared Goff. It goes on and on how deep this position is. Maybe your home league, you won't need to do this, but in some high stakes formats next year, I'm going to wait on quarterback and maybe tight end, which we'll get to, and just load up on running backs and wide receivers in the first 8 to 10 rounds. My guy Richardson will be cheap. Stroud is a QB 26 right now. CJ Stroud. Playing the matchups you can with quarterbacks too. And just in waiver wires, man, more than half the games played on Sunday, Harmon, featured backup quarterback versus backup quarterback. This is just a position you can wait on. Even in Superflex, the turnover at the QB position the last couple of years has been crazy. I'm more willing to draft a wide receiver or a running back above a quarterback in round 1 in Superflex leagues. So my main lesson, waiting on QBs more than ever next year.
No, and it's a great point because I do think it's really great to have the positional advantage of the Lamar Jackson, of the Josh Allen. Joe Burrow this year, I think, provided a little bit of that edge too. Jalen Hurts wasn't terrible, but he's the QB6. For the most part, the group of players that it stunk to took from, and it stinks to take from this group every single year, it's that like 50th to 70th overall player group where it was CJ Stroud, it was Anthony Richardson, it was Joe Burrow, it was Kyler Murray. Like that was the range of guys that went there. Burrow actually was even in some ADP a little bit out at the top 70, but the worst picks you could have made at quarterback were that Stroud, Murray, Richardson group, because their production, even if Murray gave you some games, even if Richardson gave you some games, their production was just so easily replaced by guys that you mentioned, the Bo Nixes of the world, the Baker Mayfields. We're in the injury-prone league together with our guy Edwin Porras, and I took Baker Mayfield so late in that draft, and he ended up being one of the best picks. I was in the championship. As of now, I don't know if I've won that championship because it's one of these Jahmyr Gibbs teams I'm talking about. I'm an underdog going into Monday night, so we'll see. Pat Fitzmaurice has a great team there, but that was just like, okay, sure, I'm taking Baker Mayfield. He ended up being one of the best picks in that draft because he's been so productive the last 2 years. So yeah, man, I'm with you. I kind of feel like if you're not taking one of the top quarterbacks, and I do kind of want to have a conversation about the top quarterbacks, where do we rank these guys next year versus some of the running backs, wide receivers? But if you're not taking one of the Allens or Jacksons of the world, waiting on the position is still as viable as ever.
Good luck in that league, by the way. And just looking at Bo Nix and Sam Darnold entering fantasy drafts this year, it's easy to say in hindsight, but I remember ranking them just thinking Russell Wilson was quietly top 15 fantasy points per game in that system that Bo Nix was taking over. And the mini quarterback was productive. And those guys were just totally free, Nix and Darnold. I mean, they were on waiver wires, and they were the right situations to have the seasons that they're having. Maybe not quite as good as we thought Darnold is doing, but Dak Prescott will be back. Drake May's ascending. Maybe Bryce Young's ascending. We have Michael Penix with a bunch of weapons. So this position is ridiculously deep to the point of maybe entertain playing in more super flex leagues. But if you don't, just wait on this position and take stabs on running back and wide receivers. And all you need to do is you make the big hits. That's the key there. Just load up on those positions, and you have more lottery tickets to find the players that are the league winners.
Yeah, and it's funny because if you just look back at I think the fact that ADP has gotten sharper than ever with the quarterback position, like specifically with the rushing quarterbacks, right? Like it's almost become sort of a double-edged sword here now where, back in Lamar Jackson's starting days, it was like, oh yeah, like Lamar Jackson's first year, he was like a 12th round pick. And it was just such a smash pick at the time because he was obviously going to exceed that ADP. Now guys like that have the rushing bonus, at least like theoretically, Murray went in that range that I'm talking about. Anthony Richardson went in that range where I'm talking about. Like, you had to pay the iron price to get those guys. And for the most part, Kyler Murray has had a couple of good fantasy seasons on his resume. But this year, 16.8 points per game, it's actually his lowest in a minute. So like some of these guys just are who they are as passers, and they can't quite take that next leap.
But Jaden Daniels, you could get in the 10th round this year. And Drake May was free, and we knew he was going to run the second he joined. Not that he's been lighting it up. Bo Nix is running like crazy. Next year, Anthony Richardson, especially after this injury at the end of the year, he's going to be possibly available in round 10. So I get what you're saying. It is getting sharper, but there's still be opportunities, I think. I mean, Jaden Daniels was there for the taking easily. I mean, he was round 10 in high-stakes leagues at the late August still. Again, I think Anthony Richardson will fit this bill next year, and among others. So I think that the quarterback position is just crazy, crazy deep. And I wouldn't fault you for taking Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson coming off these MVP seasons. They're not going to cost you the league. But personally, I'm just waiting on that position later than ever.
That's a great transition to my first lesson learned because it's about rookie quarterbacks, and I just think we can't paint rookie quarterbacks with a broad brush here anymore, and it's specifically as it relates to how they impact their skill position players, because typically we've thought rookie quarterbacks not good for pass catchers, and certainly when you've got a spread out group like in Chicago, that was not having Caleb Williams was not good for any of those guys. But that's sort of a different situation unto itself. And I'm going to talk about spoiler. I'm going to talk about some of these ambiguous target trees later on. But specifically in some of these other guys, I mean, you mentioned Jaden Daniels. A big part of the reason beyond the fact that he can run, that was always going to make him great in fantasy. But I said all offseason, like that gets you like the baseline, right? That gets you to QB 11, which is Kyler Murray, who's had a, I think, disappointing season. And he's still the quarterback 11 in fantasy because he ran for 550 yards and 5 touchdowns, at least so far through week 7 through 17 weeks here. But like whoop-de-doo, really to get to that next ceiling, you also have to be dynamic as a passer, which absolutely Jaden Daniels did. And at different times this season, so did Bo Nix. And more importantly with those two guys, Dalton, they took players with them. We all know that Terry McLaurin had the best season of his career, specifically from a touchdown perspective. Like that's obviously been the biggest reason that he's taken a leap into like a top 5 fantasy receiver status, which I mean, it's been so awesome to see. I always felt like he was capable of having that type of season. He finally had the quarterback to do it. But then you look at Cortland Sutton too. I mean, Cortland Sutton had pretty close to a career year. Right now, 17 weeks, he's got 983 yards. He's got 7 touchdowns. His career high is 10 in receiving touchdowns, which he's probably not going to meet, but that was also a little bit fluky last year. Really, he's putting up numbers from an efficiency perspective closer to that 2019 season, which was his second year in the league. He tore his ACL after that year. It really felt like he was on an upward trajectory, but it took getting Bo Nix, a rookie quarterback, to get back on track here. So I don't know what this next year's quarterback class is going to look like. Everybody says it's not going to be a good group. We often do need to be a little bit cautious with rookie quarterbacks. It's really difficult to predict these guys. These are also two situations that I wasn't necessarily super jazzed about. Sean Payton's offense, Cliff Kingsbury's offense. I had questions about both those units, so I don't even know that I can necessarily say I got these situations right. I probably got them wrong. But the lesson I'm taking away from this is that we can't just say like blanket rules, rookie quarterbacks bad for pass catchers, this, that, and the other, because that was not the case this year.
What a season Jaden Daniels is having. Awesome show he put on Sunday night. Sack avoidance was supposed to be a major problem for him, but he's been great, the pressure to sack ratio. But a great point, and it's not just them running and helping your fantasy teams. He saved Terry McLaurin's career. I mean, he went from having, just outperforming better than his box score would indicate given his quarterbacks, and now he's turning him into a fantasy superstar. Scary Terry, top 15 ranked weekly. Too bad he put up his worst fantasy performance in the fantasy championship. But when you get Zacchaeus moved to the slot, apparently he's just unstoppable there after they bench McCaffrey. Bo Nix, Sutton helps Sutton's value. These are great points, and nothing that Drake May could have done on New England either. That's not his fault. He made Hunter Henry viable for a while. I do before we move to the next lesson, just want to ask you, where do we stand on Caleb Williams? I mean, Scott Barrett made the post saying in terms of accuracy and sack avoidance, it's easily the worst quarterback season in fantasy points history. Magnitudes worse than any season of Zach Wilson. A lot of these stats he's put up have been down 20 points. I mean, it counts the same for fantasy. And I know Andy Barron sees the positives, but I don't know, man. Is Caleb Williams a bust?
By the way, just one more rookie quarterback point before we talk about Caleb Williams. Drake London, his second 100-yard game of the season came last night with Michael Penix.
Great point. Yes, great point. And he just missed that Mooney play. I know everyone's giving him a hard time for not calling the timeout, but guess what? Defenses are not settled on that, and Mooney was open, game over if he hits that throw. Penix dealt with some real accuracy issues, but his ADOT was in like the 98th percentile going deep. Great. I didn't even talk about him as well. Yes, good. Yeah, the second 100-yard season, Drake London. All right, so let's, the rookie. This is a historical rookie class. I want to talk about the receivers and even running backs and tight ends.
Yeah, for sure. I on the Caleb Williams point, I can kind of see both sides of it, because I do think if you've watched Caleb Williams all year and you've taken in some of the data points, like you mentioned, Scott Barrett from Fantasy Points, maybe we can throw the tweet up here on YouTube. Maybe Jason can take care of that for us, but I'll send it after the show. He had a whole thread just showing like what a disaster rookie season it has been for Caleb Williams. Like you said, orders of magnitude worse than basically anybody else in the Fantasy Points data era. And again, if you just watch him play, if you don't come away from that, like at least a little bit concerned. I think you're fooling yourself. I think you've got blinders on about the situation, because this is what, and by the way, and that's not to say that Caleb Williams can't someday be good, but salvaging it with the Bears, I mean, look at all these guys we're talking about, the Sam Darnolds of the world. The real lesson of this year is that the quarterback prospects don't fail. Often it is that they are failed. And
organizational failure. Yes. I mean, the great Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield, pictures of them on the Panthers.
Yeah. By the way, both top, second and third in passing yards as we head into Monday Night Football right now. I tweeted that this weekend. Like that's right. And by the way, that was those guys' second teams. They flamed out with a team before that, So absolutely.
Geno Smith from the Jets. I mean, Darnold and the Jets. It's organizational failure.
People didn't like this comparison. A few people pushed back on it, but I said that the battle for the number one seed next week is between two like reclamation project quarterbacks. People didn't like me calling Jared Goff a reclamation project quarterback because he was successful in his first stop with the Rams. But let's not forget how that ended, man. He was utterly and completely dumped by the team that drafted him. They kicked him to the curb hard. So I would still call him like a reclamation project quarterback. And by the way, I'm going to also hit on this situation with one of my lessons learned, so I don't want to go too deep into it right now. But on the Caleb Williams stuff, could the Bears fail Caleb Williams? Absolutely. No question about it. They have to get this right in the offseason. I think they put way too much on his plate this year. And I think he was probably... I don't buy into I didn't buy into the generational prospect hype for him because I don't buy into that with anybody. But like him billed as this like can't miss quarterback prospect, that probably was also a little bit overstated as well.
It's a great counter. The organization is so important here. You look at the Bears quarterback history, 4,000-yard passer, 30 TDs ever. So the weather, the offensive coordinator changed midseason, and he did play a little better after the switch. You look at CJ Stroud between his rookie year and this year. Clearly, football is, as I stated in the beginning, such a team sport, and it just all the parts need to be working. That said, it's just crazy. Look at the poorest downfield accuracy, like deep. He's the worst deep throw passer in the league by, again, an order of magnitude, and that's with Keenan Allen, Roma Dunze, and DJ Moore. And all those sacks are coming with an offensive line that ranks top 10 in PFF's pass block grade. So, I mean, maybe both can be true. The Bears are failing him, and he's disappointing. So it kind of feels like both are true right now. But hopefully things can change. Still, obviously, a long time to go. But, man, some discouraging under-the-hood stats on Caleb's rookie year.
Yeah, no question about it. And like I said, I think what matters a lot is just, are we going to get the right offensive coordinator in here, the right play caller, the right head coach, all of that. That's really, really going to matter a ton, because I don't think there's any way to come out of this and just say that Caleb Williams is blameless. Like I think that's a little bit delusional, but I do think that he can. It's not over for him either. I think he can be. He certainly can be salvaged. There's enough good plays and good throws in there to squint at to say like, oh yeah, definitely he's still got some to. Statistically, yeah, I get that he's in like the Zach Wilson zone right now. I did not feel coming out of Zach Wilson's rookie year that there was a lot to hang your hat on. I do think there's some plays and some glimpses to hang your hat on for Caleb Williams. So we'll have to see what happens with him. So that was my first one. Give me your second one.
All right, sticking on the waiting on tight ends. This was the year I fell for it too. I thought it was important to come away with one of those that tier one this season, which has just backfired and been a horrific strategy unless you had Kittle, who, by the way, his numbers this year would have been the number one tight end last year too. So Kittle got it done. But that was in general a strategy that backfired on me. Entering Monday night's game, Sam Laporta is a top 10 fantasy tight end, Harmon. He'd be the wide receiver 47. I mean, that it's just a position that does not produce enough difference makers. Laporta was going in rounds 2 or 3 this season. I love Brock Bowers, and I mean, he's going to be a borderline first-round pick in PPR leagues. But if you get McBride a round or 2 later, who'd be easily the number one fantasy tight end if he had a couple more touchdowns, I can see like the hype on those two. But man, for the most part, I am waiting on this position. I understand there's leverage. I get it if you get one of the few good ones, but they're just not enough difference makers for an early pick. Let me repeat, Laporta good enough for top 10 fantasy scoring among his position, but he'd be the wide receiver 47. So like quarterback, I might be the last to draft the tight end. Quarterback, I'll be the first to drop my backup and load up there, but I might do the same in the later rounds on deeper leagues with tight ends. I mean, the Jonnu Smiths, the Zach Ertzes, all those are available. I understand you could do this at every position, but the point is you need to find these crazy league winning spike guys that are play running back or wide receiver in those rounds 1 through 10. And I think we can ignore tight end and then just play that position on the leftovers. It's certainly the way it's played out the last few years. And I think it makes fundamental sense. It's a taxing position physically, and it's just tough to put up a lot of points. So I think I'm waiting on the tight end position like I am quarterback.
Yeah, Zach Ertz is tight end 8 in fantasy right now. I mean, Tucker Kraft, who has had like a few games, he's got 7 touchdowns. He's tight end 7. And like, yeah, you could find these guys super late, give you usable weeks. Obviously, David Njoku went pretty late this year, and he's like 10.6 points per game. That would put him at tight end 4 on the season. So yeah, I mean, you can find guys late. Jonnu Smith, as you mentioned, that's a great example. I'm interested in Bowers and McBride. It's just, I wonder where they end up going in drafts, because they are going to be viewed as those clear-cut positional advantages, and it's going to be interesting to, again, see where those sort of guys play out. The problem with this, Dalton, is that the vast majority of NFL offenses, I would say like 95%, they're not going to run through a tight end. They're just not. Like, I mean, Arizona is a pretty clear exception to that right now, where they do run that thing through the tight end position. Like, would the Raiders even be running it through Bowers to the point where he has 144 targets if Devontae Adams played on this team the entire season? I would say there's no shot he has 140 targets if Devontae Adams is on that team. It takes a unique situation. It takes probably the right play caller. Certainly, I think Drew Petzing has wanted to do so much with heavy personnel stuff, and it's been interesting to see that in Arizona. But again, that offense is, I think, probably failed to meet expectations. Bowers is definitely, it's a unique situation there. It's just not going to happen for many guys like that. Tight ends are often ancillary pieces in passing games just by the design of it.
And I know this doesn't make sense to say the position both sucks and is deep at the same time, but I think there'll be enough players that will talk ourselves into making leaps too as well, to add, to, like, if you miss out on the top 12 guys, Dalton Kincaid another year in the league, Chig Okonkwo big time. I love Jatavian Sanders will be free in drafts next year. And what if Bryce Young's good? So I just think that's a position that I am going to painfully wait on and just not care. I get it. I play in so many leagues. I'm going to draft a McBride or Bowers for fun. But I think that in general, I'm just going to really ignore it.
All right, I'll get into my second one here. We sort of, again, put our feet into this topic just a second ago with some of these veteran reclamation project quarterbacks. But to me, these ecosystems with a great play caller and a true veteran quarterback are just the best ones to invest into. I'm talking about Detroit with Ben Johnson and Jared Goff. I'm talking about Tampa Bay, Liam Cohen, who, a lot of my lessons are not going to be things that we can just like clearly point to next year and be like, this is the path we follow, because as Dalton said at the top, football is really hard to predict. But Liam Cohen ended up being one of the best play callers in the league. Baker Mayfield, a veteran quarterback who has just a long catalog of things to go off of. Absolutely a great ecosystem to invest into. Kevin O'Connell, Minnesota Vikings. A great play caller, great designer, and at this point, Sam Darnold's a veteran quarterback who's spent time collecting a catalog of details in the league. To me, some of those were the best ecosystems you could invest into this season. They're the ones I'm going to be interested in investing into next year. If there's a spot where a veteran quarterback gets paired with one of these up and coming offensive coaches, I'm going to be interested in that again. I would guess Ryan Grubb's back in Seattle, but like a better play caller with a veteran quarterback like Geno Smith, I'd be interested in that. So that's sort of like if I'm not getting into one of the obvious great ecosystems in the league with a great quarterback like a Burrow, like a Lamar, like an Allen, all that stuff, those are like the second group that I really want to invest into.
Yeah, totally. And that's why I'm kicking myself for not ranking Nix and Darnold even higher. It was just obvious. Peyton had Russell Wilson, who looked washed as a top 15 fantasy QB and like fantasy points per drop back. And Nick Mullins was throwing for 400 yards in that O'Connell system. So, yeah, one nice thing about Darnold is he's able to stay healthy. That's also the thing with him in his career. He would suffer injuries even when he would start to play well. So great for him. Awesome to see. Most quarterback wins ever by a Minnesota quarterback. I believe 100 passer rating or higher in all but 3 games this season. Pretty impressive. And then Tampa Bay's annoying, Harmon, because I did learn this lesson with play callers and systems in previous years, and I do target them. And I was afraid Canales leaving would be a major problem for Baker Mayfield. And Liam Cohen, I can't say enough, dude. This last week, frustrating that Bucky, they just passed the ball every time they got inside the 10. 4 touchdown passes inside the 10. But some of these play calls where they'll flare out Rashad White to the left, Irving to the right, and then down the seam a tight end, he had 3 options for a touchdown.
Oh, yeah.
Mayfield's playing awesome, but Cohen's system is just second level right now, man. It is really impressive, innovative, and awesome stuff that deserves a ton of credit.
That's why I think they can't let him get out of the building. I said this on yesterday's show, where you just did this with Canales last year, and you got better. You got a better play call, and I think Canales is good, but like they got a better play caller in Liam Cohen after just waving goodbye to Dave Canales to go coach the team that they just beat up on. By the way,
and he come from what tree? I didn't pay attention to this enough. Sorry to cut. Cohen's like a McVay tree or something. I just ignored.
Yeah.
Is he not?
He was the Rams offensive coordinator in their 2022 season. I think that's why people.
So that's why he was hyped. Okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
And he's been back and forth between college and the NFL. He's been at like University of Kentucky. He was with Will Levis and stuff like that. But yeah, he definitely. But this is the thing. I mean, he's under Sean McVay and things like that. And like the McVay tree is not impervious to misses. I mean, the great Shane Waldron comes off the Sean McVay tree. So that's another thing too, is why this is hard to figure out, because it's not just like, oh, this tree's struck gold, anything like that. But like people put Bobby Slowick into this like genius category after last year. I never really bought into that. I'm like, he's just running a typical old Shanahan offense, and that offense is irritating to say the least this season.
Yeah, no doubt, man. You ready for my third?
Let's toss to our first break, and then when we come back on the other side, we will get to your third one, my third one, and a few others here right after this.
Introducing Daily Draw, the latest free-to-play game from Yahoo Sports. Daily Draw gives you a pack of 6 prediction cards every day based on the day's biggest sporting event. Download or update the Yahoo Sports app on the Apple App Store or Google Play and join the action with Daily Draw today.
All right, we're back. Dalton, give me your third lesson learned from the 2024 NFL season.
All right, I've decided I think I'm going to mostly ignore advanced running back stats.
Ooh, okay.
Cool way of showing what happened, but I'm no longer giving them much predictive value after what we've seen here. I mean, they're just non-predictive. Derrick Henry is much better now with Lamar Jackson. Josh Jacobs suddenly isn't the bottom of the league running back in these stats when he doesn't have O'Connell as his quarterback. Look at Devon Achan's advanced stats. Last year, record setting. This year, bottom 3 when Skylar Thompson and Tyler Huntley are his quarterback. Achan did put on some weight. Maybe he wasn't as elusive this season. The explosive plays were gone, but I think this is team context here is not being weighed enough. Is it the situation or the player? Saquon Barkley, I voided in large part because of these advanced stats, and shockingly, he looks better on the Eagles. Situation played a huge role in these advanced stats, in my opinion. And fading Barkley has just been painful, Harmon. I mean, I used to hype him here on this podcast, and he just looks ridiculously good and awesome offensive line now. And imagine if Jalen Hurts didn't steal 11 goal line touchdowns. I mean, what?
Can you believe they still push Kenny Pickett?
Yeah, I can believe that. Yeah, that was part of my theory for Barkley down. Is Hurts going to take all these goal line scores? And he did. He did, and he still was the number 1 fantasy player. This crazy. Barkley's been obviously a league winner and 2,000 yards and awesome. And the advanced stats suggested that doesn't matter his team. He wasn't breaking these tackles, and his numbers as a receiver specifically showed major decline. So these are fun stats to look at, whatever. But I'm going to mostly realize that if you change teams and context, it's not necessarily a reflection of the player being washed.
Yeah, I mean, running back's really hard to get right with stats. It just is, because it's so the production of the position in and of itself is just so dependent on outside variables. Every metric is a call. This is true of every position in football, but I think especially at running back, almost every metric is tainted by, the surrounding variables and the ecosystem that the players find themselves in. I will say, Dalton, I don't think we're ever going to suffer for this quite like we suffered this year, because this was just I really think this was an outlier circumstance for some of these running backs, like true special talents at the position, like Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley. And I do, Jacobs is a great player. I do think he's a little bit stepped down from these guys. But like all of those guys went from objectively bad offenses, right? Tennessee, the Giants, the damn Raiders, they went from awful circumstances to some of the best rushing ecosystems in the NFL, period, full stop. In Baltimore, in Philadelphia, and certainly what Jacobs and the Packers have done this year, it's been pretty incredible to watch. We're probably never going to see that again. I mean, the free agent running backs this year, it's like Najee Harris, Aaron Jones, Javonte Williams, Nick Chubb, J.K. Dobbins, Rico Dowdle. None of those guys I think are going to quite move the needle like these special talents did, but it is a good example. It's just a good lesson to learn about the running back position as a whole. I do think what we saw this year in terms of these special talents going to special situations, that is probably a one-off.
Completely outlier season. We can name Josh Jacobs, Aaron Jones, Barkley, Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon. I mean, that's definitely a special season when it comes to backs changing teams. Now, what is it? Where do we stand as far as aging backs? Because all those guys are old, I just mentioned.
God,
and
who
James
knows?
Conner. And you throw in Connor too. So that actually was one. If we overlapped, I was going to say, don't be scared off aging backs is another lesson we learn here. I mean, I know Henry's built different. I hyped him, but Barkley, I knocked a little, even though he's younger. And these Aaron Jones, they all look fine. And maybe we need to not worry as much if running backs are 28, 29 years old. Certainly this, or again, maybe this was an outlier, but boy, the teams that were older, running backs who were older, who switched teams and improved their environment, it really helped them buck that aging curve.
Yeah, I'm really not sure what to do with the running back age cliff, stuff like that, because it's been such a good tenet to follow in fantasy. Scott Pianowski's come on the show and talked about, like, once you get past 27, you're in the danger zone.
Yeah,
well, we had a lot of guys back at 27 and beyond be pretty good picks this year. Even Alvin Kamara. Had a great year.
Forgot him. Yeah,
and he obviously did not change. So they did change systems, and I think that helped him, in terms of the rushing efficiency there, reach new heights under Kubiak there in New Orleans. But regardless, I don't know. The thing is, though, I hope this is not what happens, because it's been awesome to see these guys, get the rebirth and all that. But if we're sitting on this podcast here 365 days from now, Dalton, talking about what a bloodbath it was at the running back position this year, injuries, age cliffs, I would not be surprised, just because that's been the history of the league. Now, I'm hoping that doesn't happen. I don't think that's likely, but I do think that is within the range of possible outcomes.
Yeah, definitely. Compared to this year, everyone drafting receivers early and they all get injured. So then next year it'll absolutely could regress the other way.
Okay. I will talk through my third one here, which is a wide receiver's rookie season is not all that matters. Obviously, I think the biggest lesson that this applies to is a guy like Jackson Smith-Njigba, who, go back and look at some of the tweets from not just about JSN's rookie year, but also just the first 4 weeks of his season this year. He's wide receiver 8 right now in total points. He's been one of the best wide receiver picks you can make in fantasy this year. 1,100 yards. He's been super efficient. He's been super effective. New role, things like that. But yeah, he had like kind of a disappointing rookie season. But man, he was great in his second season. You see this happen all the time where, guys also. I don't know I think that's the easy one to say, like a wide receiver's rookie season on the negative end, like don't just totally write these guys off. Now, if the NFL film is truly bad, I think that's a different conversation. If they show that they just can't hack it in the league, like I do think that is going to put a certain limitation on them. Quentin Johnston, he's definitely more viable this year, but he's still a guy that had 77 targets and he's wide receiver 42 in total points because he scored 8 touchdowns. Like they got the role right for him, but I think that still put a pretty hard ceiling on him as a player. So, but JSN's rookie year film was not bad. Like, and anyone telling you like yards per outrun showed the film was bad, that's BS. Like, that's just not true. So remember that stuff. I'm curious, Dalton, on the other end of it. Sometimes I think we do get a little aggressive with young players, and I think both you and I can do this, and the whole community can do this for sure. Where, okay, this is a rookie. Now imagine what they're going to be in the second season and the third season, like projecting that constant step up. And sometimes that doesn't happen. I mean, I think a guy like Jaden Reed's a great example this year, where I think he's been basically the same player he was as a rookie, which is good. That's great for the Packers. 800 yards, 6 touchdowns. Like, he's still a very, very good player for them, but he hasn't taken that leap to like a true number one receiver. And there are other guys you could point that example to as well. Certainly, I think a guy like, maybe from a statistical perspective, Chris Olave's plateaued certain players around the league. How do we feel just about, like, what do we do with these rookie wide receivers on positive and negative ends of it?
A couple other examples of players taking a while to improve after the rookie season. Jamison Williams took a while. Jordan Addison this year is a great example.
Great call.
He benefited from he put up most of his numbers when Justin Jefferson was sidelined last season. His underlying stats weren't anything impressive at all, like target rates, yard per out run, and he looks way better this year. I mean, he looks like a real player, and Justin Jefferson commanding all that attention. He's just really benefiting. Le'Veon Bell is like the best example. He looked like Devontae Adams might be the best example because you had him as like the worst route runner and he developed. As for the rookies, I mean, this kind of delves into my next lesson. Is I'm going to be more aggressive drafting rookie wide receivers. So this lends into that conversation. What do we make of these others that, like Xavier Worthy and Jalen McMillan, clearly due to regress, 6 touchdowns last 4 weeks, but those guys have been top 20 fantasy wideouts down the stretch. Are we going to overrate them because of their strong finish?
McMillan maybe. Worthy probably not. Just because a lot of the McMillan stuff I think has been pretty designery, and I if I'm Tampa Bay, I don't think I've seen enough from McMillan just to like walk into next season with him as my wide receiver too. I think that would be a screaming need for Tampa Bay. If Godwin's a free agent. He's on an expiring contract, and I don't know what they're going to do with him just because he's coming off of an injury and all that stuff. But to me, I think that they would need somebody at that position to be a little more consistent than a guy. I think McMillan could be a nice 3. I don't think I'd want him as a 2. But for Xavier Worthy, I think he's shown enough to kind of continually get that, boost up and things like that. So, but that's a great point just about the rookie wide receivers, Dalton. And I like this being your fourth point here is that, like, this happens every year. I feel like every season I'm coming out of it saying, man, like, draft more rookie wide receivers or make sure those guys are on your waiver wire speed dial, because there's always a couple of candidates at the end of the season, at least, who become like routine, consistent fantasy contributors. This year, we've definitely gotten several guys like that, even beyond the obvious stars of like Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, and Ladd McConkey.
I mean, this is, like I said, a historic class. Jaden Daniels helping fantasy managers win. And also Bucky Irving is going to be a top 10 fantasy back next year. I love Tyrone Tracy. Brock Bowers setting records. But first time in NFL history, 4 rookies eclipsed 1,000 receiving yards. And that's before this extra game, too, which is cool. And Marvin Harrison Jr., the guy drafted in the first round of fantasy leagues, was not one of them. And Rome Odunze was not one of them either. But the reason I like to say, and you're right, this is no new thing. Drafting rookie receivers has definitely been a theme the last few years now, but they peak at the right time often, frequently in the fantasy playoffs, and the tiers in which you are drafting these rookie receivers, their upside's so much higher than everyone else when they're going in drafts. The guys like the McMillans, the lesser hyped rookies, but man, Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors without a quarterback, your guy Ladd McConkey, major difference makers, and especially in your fantasy playoffs. Brian Thomas Jr. has been a league winner in the second half. I mean, Jalen McMillan, 6 receiving touchdowns, second most ever for a rookie over their final 4 games of a season. He has one more game to play, but it's a territory of like OBJ, Julio Jones, and Randy Moss. Rookies, again, historic year. We can't expect it every year. But the rookie receivers in particular, it has been a theme where they just make major impacts. If you can, and some of them requires patience, or maybe you're able to grab them off your waiver wire, but rookie receivers making major impacts at the end of fantasy season yet again.
I will say, just, when we're talking about like, hey, the post-bye rookie bump, or these guys, sailing and soaring in the second half of their seasons, it isn't magic. Right. For a guy like Rome Odunze is a great example. Like, nothing was going to change about that situation, because the two veteran guys are still there. The ecosystem still stunk. The quarterback play was still going to be bad. Like that one's just like stuff like that. It's not going to change, right? For a guy, even Marvin Harrison Jr., like there was nothing that was going to change about that situation necessarily. So it doesn't just like happen that these guys have to take off in the second half of the season. It's got to be the right set of circumstances, which for McMillan, which for Worthy, I think we did see that come together. And obviously for Brian Thomas Jr., same thing. Like Brian Thomas Jr. was fantastic all year. I think he did get better as the year went on as an individual player, but also like the circumstances changed for him. So many dudes got hurt, and he ended up just being the engine of that team's offense, which was great because, I mean, he's really, really good. He should be. But, yeah, again, it's not just like a little magic pixie dust that this like helps these wide receivers take off.
Dunze needs his own section, maybe. Don't draft a rookie projected to be his team's wide receiver 3 on a Shane Fraudrin offense. That's the new rule moving forward. And you're right. Brian Thomas Jr. benefited from Gabe Davis, Evan Ingram, and Christian Kirk all going down. But talk about a post-rookie bump. Do you see the designed plays for him this last weekend? I mean, multiple screens and a rush attempt. He was tackled at the 1. Hope you're sitting down. Brian Thomas Jr. almost scored yet again. Awesome player, but he is obviously going to be super hyped next year. And he might require a top 15 pick in PPR leagues. But look at that. I mean, he was available, round 8, 9, and 10, and now he's going to be a top 15 pick the next year. So that's a big win for the rookie wideout, even in a year that Marvin Harrison Jr. really disappointed.
Dude, Thomas is a freak. Like, there's just not very many players in the league at the position that can handle some of that screen work and also win on like big boy downfield routes. Most of like the guys getting the designery touches and stuff like that, it's because, and look, like the Jags have problems offensively. We'll see what the next system does, but some guys aren't doing like there's not a lot of guys that are doing both. This is why Dalton, by the way, that I called him like the actualized version of like a Christian Watson type player, or what people wanted like Quentin Johnston to be as a prospect. It's the Martavis Bryant archetype. This was why I compared it to Martavis Bryant, like the actualized version of this player, because that was the theory with these guys. It's like, oh yeah, they're these big wide receivers who can also be freaky after the catch. And Watson, as a rookie, was really freaky after the catch. Johnston was a freak show in college after the catch. Bryant was definitely a freak show after the catch in the NFL. However, like all three of those guys to different degrees really struggle with like the downfield contested stuff, consistently separating. But Thomas didn't have those struggles in his prospect profile. That's what made him such a tantalizing pick, a perfect pick for Jacksonville. He's an awesome player and a very rare set of skills.
And let me get this straight. Jaden Daniels was throwing to Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors. That's correct in college?
And
they lost football games?
Per the games. Yes, that's true.
Yeah, and they lost football games. That's crazy. Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be drafted super high next year, rightfully so. Oh, I was going to say, Caleb Williams, the big disappointment, number 1. Marvin Harrison Jr., it's not just the lack of explosion, and I know you will defend him, but my goodness, the catch point is ridiculous.
I mean,
it's like, it's a problem. It is a problem, him at the catch point. Major problem. But he might be a guy to target in fantasy next year because everyone who, is so burned by him. But
totally
an exciting rookie class, and I expect not the same next year, but I believe everyone should target rookie receivers in the middle rounds and just try to stash them in ambiguous situations because they often emerge when it matters most in your fantasy season.
Okay, so your fourth point was basically draft more rookie receivers. You said that Rome Odunze deserves his own section. He's actually going to be a big part of my fourth point here, which we will get to right after this next break. All right, we're back. We teased on the other side of the break that my fourth point was going to be sort of kind of Rome Odunze related. My fourth lesson here is that ambiguous target trees do not equal ambiguous backfields. The great theory from JJ Zacharyson, you want to target these ambiguous backfields because typically one running back will emerge from that ambiguous backfield, whether it's by health or whatever. Great example this year, Cincinnati Bengals. We had 2 running backs kind of going in that same range, Zach Moss, Chase Brown. Zach Moss goes down, Chase Brown just inherits all the work, and he ends up being one of the best running back picks that you could make in fantasy football this year. Maybe I'm overreacting to this year, and I'd have to really kind of dive into the data. That's also going to be a really tough thing to define. I don't think there is sort of data study that you could do to figure this out. Ambiguous target trees, sometimes they just stay ambiguous. And I think oftentimes they do because, one, wide receiver doesn't work like running back, right? Where one guy gets removed from the equation and all of that leftover work just gets put on the other player. That doesn't necessarily always happen because wide receiver is a talent-based position. Even as I'm talking about Brian Thomas Jr., right, where all these other guys get hurt, Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis, Evan Ingram, all of them miss time. And that work just becomes Brian Thomas's work, Dalton. That doesn't happen unless Brian Thomas is really, really freaking good. And even, by the way, if those guys are all healthy, and this does not take anything away from Brian Thomas Jr., there is a 0% chance he is seeing like a 30+% target share, 34% target share in the same like of guys like A.J. Brown and Puka Nacua, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. That's the group he was in after his bye week. That's not happening if all those guys are healthy and on the field, because and it would probably be pretty ambiguous there. So yeah, definitely injuries can create clarity at the position, but that's not always the case. Again, the Packers it was an ambiguous target tree. Shoot, we're 17 weeks in the season. It's still pretty damn ambiguous as to like who's what and why is this guy coming off the field? Who's rotating in and here? Because I don't think anybody has necessarily, I think Dobbs has played better than his rookie season for sure, but nobody's taken a step up to be like a true number one wide receiver. The Colts group was pretty ambiguous all year. The Bears definitely somebody's got to emerge as Caleb Williams as number one. No, they don't. No, they don't. That's just not how it has to happen because all of those guys are good enough to demand targets while none of them is like a true alpha elite wide receiver one. DJ Moore is a really, really good player, but he's not that elite wide receiver one either. So my lesson is that sometimes these crowded, ambiguous trees, they can just stay crowded and ambiguous, and it doesn't have to become clear over the course of the season.
Your running back example made me think in a different world, what if Pollard gets injured and Spears stays healthy? Did you see Tajay Spears out there? Man, he looked so good and unfortunately suffered a second concussion despite wearing that Guardian cap. But and what do we do with Devonta Smith and Jalen Waddle, who remain disappointments as their clear wide receiver 2 on their team? But in general, I like your point here, Harmon, and trying to decipher that is key, but realizing that a lot of it will just remain ambiguous and there won't be a winner. But the key is figuring out each situation and how it will be, because maybe Brian Thomas would have been buried still, maybe he wouldn't have emerged nearly as much had those injuries not allowed him to.
Yeah. And I don't think drafting guys from this is, it's bad. Like I'm not saying stay away and avoid these situations because you would have missed out on Brian Thomas Jr. Even the Buffalo Bills, they're another tree that's still super ambiguous. That wide receiver room is very ambiguous, but Khalil Shakir ended up being a pretty good pick for people this year. And I don't know that it's necessarily going to be clear next season or whatever. So it's just, it also doesn't have to be bad for the team's offenses. I think the reason that Indianapolis's tree and Chicago's tree disappointed in particular is because the quarterback play wasn't up to snuff. Not all those guys' fault, as we've covered, but definitely just bottom line, quarterback play wasn't good enough to support multiple players. The Packers, I think they've run into some problems with this against good teams, but by and large, they're still a very, very good NFL offense. So it doesn't even have to be like a negative NFL thing. It's just from a fantasy perspective, sometimes those ambiguous trees remain ambiguous. On those like wide receiver 2 points, I don't know. They're just it's always tough when you're a non-elite wide receiver across from an elite wide receiver and your quarterback is not Joe Burrow, right? Like T. Higgins can crush it alongside Jamar Chase because Joe Burrow is just in a different tier than a Tua or a Jalen Hurts. And I think it's like kind of as simple as that.
Well, Devonta Smith just needs Pickett or Tanner McKee to take over, clearly.
Totally.
All right, I want to stick with my final lesson is kind of similar to yours, sticking with the wide receivers, though. I'm going to no longer ignore wide receivers who may be trade candidates. A lot of these guys that were traded this year were talked about. They're going to be traded. Deontay Johnson went from a top 15 weekly fantasy wideout to completely droppable. Amari Cooper, obviously Cleveland had its quarterback situations, but he was getting all the targets and then completely, not completely, but disappeared at times in Buffalo. DeAndre Hopkins wasn't exactly great in either situation, but these also opened situations. Calvin Ridley became a target monster. Jacoby Myers, more touchdowns would have been nice, but absolutely a fantasy top 25 wideout after the trade. Jerry Jeudy, 18 targets last week. Davante Adams was the exception as far as he maintained his value going to the Jets. But those guys were like obvious trade candidates before the year. Mm-hmm. Not only did they change their fantasy value in their new situation, which is obviously unpredictable where they're going to land, but it opened up monster target shares for their teammates. So I understand it's a guessing game, but I'm absolutely going to looking at contract situations and aging receivers who are trade candidates before the draft.
Yeah, and I think that Cleveland example is the best one there because that was a room that was a little bit crowded and ambiguous prior to Amari Cooper's exit. That thinned things out. And obviously Jerry Jeudy ended up being pretty much an every week fantasy starter. Cedric Tillman emerged. Elijah Moore gave you a couple of weeks there. So that's definitely a good point. I think it's going to be tough to pinpoint those guys next year, maybe, but
maybe this was an easy year for that. Right. Yeah.
Maybe, but at the same time, I think it's maybe you give a slight bump to those guys that are on the depth charts of the players that are leaving. What I don't think you can do is oh, well, I'm going to draft Davante Adams because he's going to go to Aaron Rodgers or something like that. Or I'm going to avoid Garrett Wilson because what if Davante Adams ends up going there? Now, that did happen, right? That did happen, but there's also plenty of possible outcomes where that doesn't take place.
It's a total fine line, and that's a great point. But I will just say I was aggressively drafting Deontay Johnson, knowing this is a possibility. I'm like, nah, and I just gnawed it. And I could have used that as a tiebreaker with other good receivers there for sure. I mean, Deontay Johnson was literally top 12 PPR to droppable because they traded him. I mean, it's just
right. But what
wild.
if he'd gotten traded to the Chiefs, or he went to Houston earlier? I mean, now it's obviously way too late, probably for everybody involved. But I think he just ended up in probably the worst situation that he could have gotten into. Because they're happy with Flowers and Bateman, and Deontay is a little bit of a head case, so he just couldn't handle that. So
totally fair counter. I just would like to acknowledge the volatility of those players might be greater than I was prepared to acknowledge before.
Yeah, and all of those guys you just talked about, Cooper, declining but good player. Hopkins, declining but good player. Deontay Johnson, weird player, but a good player. The only one that really survived the move and got better was Davante Adams, who is an elite player, different than all of these other guys. Even if he is 5% less than peak Davante Adams, it takes a real special player to just change teams in the middle of the season and keep it rocking. And
a quarterback that you've caught of 200 touchdowns together.
It took a minute too. Also, in fairness, it took a minute for that to they just now at the end of the season looked Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams old. Way too late for the Jets, but that's why he ended up having a great fantasy playoff run. But it was way too late, really.
Yeah, 100%. Sorry, 100 touchdowns. But you knew Rodgers was going to try to get his 500th to Adams, so I think he'll play and try to do that. But yes, you're right. It even took a while for that to happen, and but he emerged over Garrett Wilson. Was impressive. But yeah, I just think it's something to think about because again, these Davante Adams trade rumors and Deontay Johnson didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, these were talked about before the season, 100%.
I think, by the way, Aaron Rodgers, to get his 500th career touchdown, I think he should have to throw it to Malachi Corley. I think he should have to go to Corley, who's been a game day healthy scratch for a long time, but he was apparently a Rodgers guy, and they're all jacked up to draft Malachi Corley in the third round, which was such a terrible pick at the time. That's in order to get the 500th career touchdown, he should have to throw it to him.
Dude, lowest QBR game of any season. Aaron Rodgers, 1.2 last week. Most sacks in NFL history. Took his first safety in nearly a decade.
Good thing they came out to that big boombox, right? That was sick.
Yeah, definitely. The calls to run it back are getting quieter after that performance. That was ugly.
I would say so. Okay, my fifth and final point here, my final lesson learned from this season. Offensive line matters a lot, but it's really hard to crack that nut in the offseason. 3 examples I'll throw out there of offensive lines that really mattered this year, positively and negatively. Number 1, Houston. I mean, if you are having the what happened to the Houston Texans offense and your first point is not offensive line, both I think from a coaching perspective and a player perspective, you've start over, go back, do not pass go right to jail, whatever, start the whole thing over because you're missing the point if you're not discussing offensive line there. That is number 1. But at the same time, Dalton, damn, there was nothing wrong with that Texans offensive line last year. They actually played really well even when they had guys injured, and Laramie Tunsil was like one of the best left tackles in the league. He's just played poorly this year. There's been other guys up front that have played poorly. How are you supposed to see that coming? That's difficult. Tampa Bay is another one that I would throw out there. That offensive line, especially from a run blocking perspective and a pass block perspective too, but certainly from a run game perspective, was a huge issue last year. They draft Graham Barton, rookie center, yeah, but like the rest of the line is pretty intact. That's been one of the best run blocking units in the league this year. They've been fantastic, and it's a big reason why Bucky Irving's been awesome, why Rachaad White has even been useful in fantasy, even though he's the second running back on the team. Washington, another great example that I think that line was supposed to be like the worst in the league, and I don't think that the people like Brandon Thorne, who evaluated as maybe the worst offensive line in the league on paper, were wrong about that, but it's just that unit way outkicked expectations. So this is kind of what I'm saying here, and a little bit like it's a lesson learned, but I don't really know how to apply it. It's just an offensive line and like a coach's pass protection plan can sink an entire offense, can sink a very talented unit. It's just really difficult to see those situations coming.
It's the system, the unit, how much of a quarterback stat is the sack, even just all the pre-snap stuff, identifying where it's coming from and all that. A lot of moving parts, as we said throughout the pod, but Washington was a great example. I was going to say, I expected to be one of the worst entering the year pretty much universally. Not a problem. And also Baltimore's offensive line is considered to be a problem.
True.
And in that first game with Derrick Henry, I'm like, did I underrate the offensive line situation here? And haven't heard anything since week one about that. So anytime the Rams suffer an injury there, like they need the perfect oil machine there, and their left tackle's down, that offense doesn't is not clicking on all cylinders. Offensive line, very important, but I'm with
even
you. Like,
Kansas City, man. I mean, we talk a lot about like the wide receiver issues, but if you're having the what's up with the Chiefs offense, which by the way, no one's having right now anymore after the last couple of games, but at different points of the season, you weren't talking about the left tackle issue. Like Kingsley Suamataia, the rookie that they wanted to start out there, was a disaster. Wanya Morris wasn't any better. They're just now sort of starting to stabilize. They signed DJ Humphries, emergency player coming off a torn ACL. He's been injured. They're just now getting functional left tackle play because they bumped out Joe Thuney, one of the best left guards in the league, to play left tackle. Like the absolute emergency situation has been the answer for them, and like now they're getting functional tackle play, and now the offense is, in addition to Worthy's playing better, in a better role for him, Marquise Brown's back out there, Hopkins a little more integrated, all that stuff, that the receiver stuff does matter, but it did start up front for Kansas City this year in my opinion.
And then how obvious is it in hindsight? You have one of the best running backs of the last decades. Was he Barkley 27? I mean, he wasn't that old, and going from a bad offensive line to an elite offensive line in Philadelphia. And I hope you're sitting down. Shockingly, it resulted in, career best season. I mean, it's looks obvious in hindsight. If he was just a better player in an awesome situation with a great offensive line. And that's resulted in a lot of fantasy players winning their leagues by drafting, an aging, boring veteran running back in their second round or first round in your first round in your home league. And boy, it paid off, man. Barkley, what a year. And that offensive line was a big reason why.
It was very possible to get Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry on the same team this year. Very, very, very possible, which is pretty wild. And I don't even think a lot of teams probably ended up taking that approach, but I'm be curious I'm sure this is probably really way too hard to look up, but when we do the Yahoo internal data recap podcast, which we will do here, I think in a week, actually, we're going to do that show. I wonder how many Barkley and Derrick Henry teams are out there and how many of them won their fantasy championship, because that was very, very easy to stack those two guys. And
just to finish the offensive line, it is a boring topic to talk about, but the Niners, and without Trent Williams, their offense is just so different. I mean, it's it's Purdy, maybe he's not, all this contract. It's but then if they had him healthy, it'd be, he's put up MVP numbers last year. So it's just, it's a hard sport to play. The quarterback, there's just so few that can transcend their environment, and offensive line is key to a lot of fantasy success. And it just totally derailed the Niners offense this season. And that's going to be, as you said, since Houston and San Francisco's priorities, 1, 2, and 3 in the offseason are all going to be the offensive line.
I don't know if you saw this tweet from Kyle Posey, who covers the San Francisco 49ers, talking about, Niners Nation blog, 49ers fans want the team to find Trent Williams' replacement or whatever. Kyle chimed in that per Sports Info Solutions, of the 200 qualifying offensive linemen, McKivitz is 179th in blown block percentage. Aaron Banks is 153rd. Pooney is 129th. Brendel is 26th, and Williams is 15th. So it's just, Trent Williams misses time. A bad offensive line gets even worse, which is definitely a huge issue.
I'm shocked Brendel didn't rank that high. It's ugly. No, it's not good at all, and that derailed the offensive system. I mean, that system is putting up the league best YPA no matter who plays quarterback. Their running back 4 is a top 10 fantasy back typically, but you got to have an offensive line that's capable of performing not at a bottom 3 level.
Yeah, it's a must, but again, it's a really difficult thing to pinpoint prior to the season. But hey, we're going to have a whole offseason of shows to try and do just that, even if it is ultimately a fruitless exercise. Dalton, any other parting shots about the 2024 football season here as we officially close the books on the fantasy season?
Just good luck if you're in your fantasy champion. By the time you listen to this, I hope you won your fantasy leagues and had a successful year. And good luck to yours in the matchup tonight, Harmon. I know I'm in that league with you, so good luck on that one.
Yes, for that league and a couple of other leagues, I'm asking the audience that watched the game already, as we have not, which one of Jahmyr Gibbs' 4 touchdowns was your favorite? That's what I'd like to know. And on that note,
had a great year talking with you, Harmon, man. Good stuff, dude. Awesome times, man. Appreciate you very much. Do a great job as the host, and another successful year in the books, my brother.
Oh, buddy, I appreciate you. You're the man, and I couldn't do this without you. And I appreciate you being here along the ride with me, man. And look, you're not going away. I'm not going away. I know you get banished to baseball realm here pretty soon, but I'm gonna have you back on the show talking football through the course of the playoffs for sure, and definitely into the off season. But yeah, it's been a hell of a year, and really appreciate you stepping into the Panic Meter show, especially this year, which is I love that show, but it can be a grind sometimes. The people's panic and all that stuff. But that's what we're here for. That's why we're the qualified professionals to decide what you do and do not panic on. And Dalton was great on it all year. Appreciate you, Dalton. And thanks to everybody who listened to that show in particular. But for now, that's going to do it for this show today. Quick programming note, as you may have heard on the recap pod, this week we are having 3 pods, but starting next week, we're going to be hitting your feeds on Monday and Thursday through the Super Bowl. Monday, we're going to recap the playoff games. Thursday, we're going to preview the next games. We'll also hit on any breaking news, coaches, firings, all that stuff, because, man, that is right around the corner as well on those shows as needed. On Thursday, Andy Behrens joins me to preview Week 18 for all of the sickos out there. People still playing, but also DFS, prop bets, just good old-fashioned football talk. We're going to be doing all that on Thursday. Until then, we are out.